Maria Elena Vasquez pressed her face against the dusty train window as the locomotive wheezed to a stop in Cedar Ridge, Colorado. The small frontier town stretched before her like a collection of wooden blocks scattered across the prairie, surrounded by endless grassland and distant purple mountains. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she gathered her few belongings and stepped onto the platform. The wedding dress in her worn carpet bag felt heavier than lead. 3 days ago, she had been Maria Elena Rodriguez, engaged to be married to William Patterson, the banker's son from Santa Fe. Now she was nobody, fleeing north with nothing but shame and a train ticket purchased with her last silver dollars. "You cannot seriously expect my family to accept this union," William's mother had declared, her voice sharp as winter wind. "Your father may have been a respected merchant, but your mother's Apache blood makes this impossible. What would people say?" Maria Elena touched the small turquoise pendant at her throat, a gift from her grandmother before the old woman passed. Her abuela had warned her that the world would always see her mixed heritage as something to overcome rather than celebrate. Half Mexican, half Apache, fully unwanted by polite society. The train whistle shrieked as it prepared to continue north, leaving Maria Elena alone on the platform. A few townspeople glanced her way, their eyes taking in her olive skin and black hair before looking away with practiced indifference. She lifted her chin and walked toward the main street, determined not to show how frightened she felt. Cedar Ridge was smaller than she had imagined. The dusty main street was lined with a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith shop, and a small church with a crooked steeple. A hand-painted sign pointed toward Murphy's Boarding House for Respectable Ladies down a side street. Maria Elena headed in that direction, hoping her remaining money would buy her a few nights while she figured out what to do next. Mrs. Murphy was a thin woman with gray hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her eyes. She looked Maria Elena up and down with the kind of examination usually reserved for livestock at market. $2 a week, breakfast included, no gentlemen callers, no drinking, no loud music. You got work lined up? "I'm hoping to find employment as a seamstress or perhaps help at the general store," Maria Elena replied, keeping her voice steady. Mrs. Murphy's gaze lingered on Maria Elena's dark features. "What's your family name?" "Vasquez." "Mexican?" Maria Elena hesitated for just a moment. "My father was from Mexico, yes." Mrs. Murphy's expression cooled. "Well, I suppose your money spends the same as anyone else's. Room 3 upstairs. Breakfast is at 7 sharp. The room was tiny but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small window overlooking the back alley. Maria Elena sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself to cry for exactly 5 minutes. Then she washed her face, braided her hair, and went downstairs to ask about work. The general store owner, Mr. Henderson, looked nervous when she inquired about employment. "Well, miss, I appreciate your interest, but I'm not really in need of help right now. Maybe try the laundry or the restaurant." The pattern repeated at every business she visited. Polite but firm rejections, eyes that wouldn't quite meet hers, suggestions to try somewhere else. By evening, Maria Elena had walked every street in Cedar Ridge twice, and had nothing to show for it but dusty skirts and a growing sense of desperation. She was sitting on the porch of the boarding house, watching the sun set over the mountains, when the sound of horses drew her attention. A man was riding down the main street on the largest horse she had ever seen, leading 2 pack mules loaded with supplies. Even from a distance, she could tell the rider was enormous, broad-shouldered and tall enough that his feet nearly touched the ground on either side of his mount. The horse and rider stopped in front of Henderson's store, and the man dismounted with surprising grace for someone so large. He wore simple ranch clothes, dark pants, and a blue shirt, with a hat that had seen better days. When he removed the hat to wipe his forehead, Maria Elena saw hair the color of wheat and a face that was more interesting than handsome, with a strong jaw and kind eyes. "Evening, Jack," Henderson called from the store doorway. "Got your supplies ready?" "Much obliged, Henry." The big man's voice carried easily across the quiet street, deep and warm like honey and tea. "How's Martha feeling?" "Better, thanks to that tea you brought. Your grandmother's recipe works miracles." Jack loaded his supplies with efficient movements, checking each item carefully. Maria Elena found herself watching the way he handled everything with gentle care, as if even flour sacks deserved consideration. When he finished, he noticed her sitting on the boarding house porch. He touched the brim of his hat in a polite greeting. "Evening, miss." "Good evening." Maria Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. She wasn't used to men acknowledging her so directly, especially not in a way that felt respectful rather than calculating. Jack seemed about to say something else, but Henderson appeared with one more package. "Almost forgot the coffee. Can't have you going without your morning coffee." "That would be a tragedy," Jack agreed, with what sounded like genuine humor. He secured the package and mounted his horse. "I'll see you next month, Henry." As he rode away, leading his pack mules toward the open range beyond town, Maria Elena felt an odd sense of loss. The stranger had looked at her like she was a person worth noticing, not a problem to be solved or avoided. The next morning brought another round of job hunting with the same results. The restaurant owner said she wasn't hiring. The laundry woman claimed she couldn't afford help. Even the church seemed hesitant to accept her offer to help with cleaning. By afternoon, Maria Elena was beginning to understand that her money would run out long before Cedar Ridge decided to give her a chance. She was sitting by the small creek that ran behind the town, trying to come up with a plan, when voices drifted over from the other side of the water. "I'm telling you, Jack, you need a woman around that place." This was a voice Maria Elena didn't recognize, gravelly and amused. "That house of yours is big enough for 3 families, and you're rattling around in it like a dried bean in a jar." "The house suits me fine, Pete." This was the deep voice from the night before, the big rancher. "I don't need complications." "What you need is someone to cook decent meals and keep you from wearing the same shirt for a week straight," Pete laughed. "Besides, you're not getting any younger. You want to spend your whole life alone out there?" "I'm not alone. I have the cattle, the horses, you pestering me every week." "Cattle don't make good conversation, and I won't live forever. Think about it, Jack. There's got to be a decent woman somewhere who'd appreciate what you have to offer." Their voices faded as they moved away, but Maria Elena sat by the creek for a long time afterward, thinking about loneliness and second chances. The big rancher seemed kind, from what little she had observed, and if he really did need help with his house, maybe there was an opportunity there. But approaching a strange man about employment was risky, especially for a woman in her situation. What if he was like all the others, polite but unwilling to associate with someone of her background? What if he expected more than housework? The frontier was full of men who thought any woman without family protection was available for their amusement. Still, what choice did she have? In 3 days, her money would be gone, and Mrs. Murphy had made it clear that payment was expected in advance. If Cedar Ridge wouldn't give her a chance at honest work, maybe she could create her own opportunity. That evening, she approached Henderson at his store just before closing time. "Excuse me, Mr. Henderson, the man who was here last night, the rancher with the pack mules. What can you tell me about him?" Henderson's eyebrows rose. "Jack Morrison? Why do you ask?" "I heard he might need help with his house. I'm a good cook and housekeeper." "Well, I suppose that's true. Jack's been on his own since his grandmother passed last year. She was the one who raised him after his parents died." Henderson seemed to be considering something. "Jack's a good man, honest and fair in his dealings. Got one of the biggest spreads in the county, raises fine cattle, but..." "But?" "Well, miss, no offense intended, but Jack tends to keep to himself. Doesn't socialize much in town. And a man living alone with a young woman, especially one who's Well, it might cause talk. Maria Elena felt the familiar sting of barely concealed prejudice. I see. When does he usually come to town? First Monday of every month for supplies. That'd be next week. Thank you for the information. That night, Maria Elena lay awake planning what she would say to Jack Morrison. She would be direct and honest about her situation, emphasize her skills, and make it clear that she expected nothing more than fair wages for fair work. If he was the kind of man Pete seemed to think he was, maybe he would see her as a solution to his problem rather than a problem herself. The week passed slowly. Maria Elena helped Mrs. Murphy with chores around the boarding house to extend her stay, mended her clothes, and practiced her speech until she could deliver it without her voice shaking. She also made quiet inquiries about Jack Morrison and learned that he had indeed inherited a large ranch from his grandfather, that he was considered an honest man if somewhat solitary, and that his grandmother had been beloved in town for her kindness and her skill with medicinal herbs. Most interesting was the story she heard from an elderly woman at the church. Jack's grandmother was half Cheyenne, you know. Beautiful woman, but she faced plenty of hardship because of it. Maybe that's why Jack keeps to himself. He knows how people can be about such things. The information gave Maria Elena hope. If Jack Morrison had grown up hearing stories about prejudice from someone he loved, maybe he would understand her situation better than most. Monday arrived gray and windy, with the promise of rain in the heavy clouds gathering over the mountains. Maria Elena dressed carefully in her best remaining dress, a deep blue cotton that brought out her eyes. She braided her hair neatly and pinned it up, then stationed herself on the boarding house porch to watch for the familiar figure on horseback. He arrived just after noon, as punctual as Henderson had predicted. Maria Elena watched him tie up his horse and enter the general store, her heart beating so hard she was sure everyone in town could hear it. She waited until he had been inside for several minutes, then walked across the street and pushed through the store's door. Jack Morrison was even larger up close, probably 6.5 feet tall with shoulders that seemed to fill the narrow aisles of the store. He was examining a piece of harness with the same careful attention she had observed before, turning it over in hands that were large but surprisingly graceful. "Excuse me," Maria Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mr. Morrison?" He looked up and she found herself looking into eyes that were not quite blue and not quite gray, like the sky before a storm. Recognition flickered across his face. "You're the lady from the boarding house." "Yes, Maria Elena Vasquez. I wonder if I might speak with you for a moment." Henderson appeared from behind the counter, curiosity written plainly on his face. Jack Morrison glanced around the store, which had grown quiet as the few other customers strained to listen. "Of course," he said. "Perhaps outside?" They stepped onto the wooden sidewalk in front of the store, and Maria Elena suddenly felt very small next to this giant of a man. But his expression was patient and kind, not threatening, so she took a deep breath and began. "Mr. Morrison, I understand you might have need of help with your household. I'm an excellent cook and housekeeper, and I'm looking for employment." His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "I see. And what brings you to Cedar Ridge, Miss Vasquez?" Maria Elena had prepared for this question, but standing in front of this quiet, imposing man, she found herself telling the truth instead of the careful half-truth she had planned. "I came here because my engagement was broken off in Santa Fe. My former fiancé's family felt that my heritage made the marriage unsuitable. I need work to support myself." Jack Morrison was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to fidget. Then he nodded slowly. "What kind of heritage caused them concern?" Another test. Maria Elena lifted her chin. "My mother was Apache." If she had expected shock or disgust, she was disappointed. Jack Morrison's expression remained unchanged, but something that might have been approval flickered in his storm-colored eyes. "I see. And you're willing to work on a ranch several miles from town?" "Yes, sir." The work would be cooking, cleaning, laundry, perhaps some help in the garden. The pay would be $25 a month plus room and board. Maria Elena's heart leaped. It was more than she had dared hope for. That would be very acceptable. There would be talk, you understand. A woman living on my ranch. Some people might make assumptions. I'm used to people making assumptions about me, Mr. Morrison. Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. I imagine you are. Can you be ready to travel tomorrow? Yes, sir. Then I'll pick you up at 8 in the morning. Bring whatever belongings you have. He touched the brim of his hat and turned to go back into the store, leaving Maria Elena standing on the sidewalk with her mouth slightly open. She had expected questions, negotiations, perhaps even an interview. Instead, Jack Morrison had offered her employment with less ceremony than buying a bag of flour. As she walked back to the boarding house, she caught fragments of conversation from the people who had witnessed their exchange. Bold as brass, approaching him like that. Wonder what she's really after. That Morrison boy always was too trusting. Maria Elena ignored the whispers. Tomorrow she would be leaving Cedar Ridge for Jack Morrison's ranch, trading one uncertain future for another. But for the first time since fleeing Santa Fe, she felt something that might have been hope stirring in her chest. That night, she packed her few belongings and tried not to think about all the things that could go wrong. She was about to move to an isolated ranch with a man she had spoken to for less than 5 minutes. He could be cruel or demanding or expect her gratitude to extend beyond honest work. But when she thought about those storm-colored eyes and the way he had listened to her story without judgment, she found herself believing that Jack Morrison might be different. And if he wasn't, well, she would face that problem when it came. She had survived rejection and humiliation. She could survive whatever came next. Outside her window, the wind whistled through the eaves of the boarding house, and in the distance, thunder rolled across the prairie like a promise of rain. The wagon wheels creaked steadily as they rolled away from Cedar Ridge across the endless grassland. Jack Morrison sat beside Maria Elena on the driver's bench, his large hands relaxed on the reins as 2 sturdy horses pulled them toward his ranch. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of sage and the promise of autumn. Maria Elena tried not to stare at her new employer, but she found herself stealing glances at his profile. In daylight, away from the curious eyes of the townspeople, he seemed less intimidating and more thoughtful. He pointed out landmarks as they traveled, his deep voice mixing with the sound of the wind through the grass. "That ridge there marks the start of my land," he said, indicating a low rise topped with pine trees. "The ranch house sits in a valley just beyond it, protected from the worst of the winter winds." "How long have you lived there?" "All my life. My grandfather built the house when he first came west. My grandmother added to it over the years, made it into a real home." His voice carried a note of affection when he spoke of his grandmother. "She would have liked you." "Why do you say that?" Jack was quiet for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "She had a gift for seeing people as they really were, not as others wanted to paint them. She used to say that character shows itself in how someone handles trouble, not in how they look or where they came from." Maria Elena felt a warm flutter in her chest at his words. "She sounds like a wise woman." She was. Taught me everything I know about medicine, both for people and animals. Showed me how to read the weather and the land, how to treat the ranch hands fairly, how to cook a decent meal when necessary. He glanced at her with something that might have been amusement, though I'll admit my cooking could use improvement. "I'm happy to take over kitchen duties." "I was hoping you'd say that." They crested the ridge, and the Morrison Ranch spread out below them like something from a painting. The house was larger than Maria Elena had expected, built of logs and stone with a wide front porch and windows that gleamed in the morning sun. Gardens flanked the main building, still green despite the advancing season. Barns and outbuildings dotted the area around the house, and beyond them, the grassland rolled away toward distant mountains. "It's beautiful," Maria Elena breathed. "My grandmother planted those gardens, vegetables, herbs, some flowers just because she liked the look of them. I've tried to keep them going, but I'm afraid I lack her touch." As they drew closer, Maria Elena could see cattle scattered across the nearest pastures, sturdy animals that looked well cared for. Several horses grazed in a fenced area near the largest barn, including the massive animal Jack had ridden to town. "How many head do you run?" "About 800, depending on the year. It's enough to keep me and the hands busy." Jack pulled the wagon up in front of the house and set the brake. "Pete Kowalski helps during roundup and branding. Good man, been working ranches since before I was born. There are 2 younger fellows, Billy and Sam, who help with the day-to-day work." Jack climbed down from the wagon and came around to help Maria Elena down. His hands were gentle but sure as he lifted her, and for a moment she was very aware of his strength and size. Then her feet touched the ground, and he stepped back, giving her space. The inside of the house was even more impressive than the outside. The main room was spacious and comfortable, with furniture that looked handmade but well-crafted. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, and windows on 2 sides let in plenty of light. Everything was clean but had the slightly empty feeling of a house where only one person lived. "Your room is upstairs," Jack said, carrying her bag. "It was my grandmother's sewing room, but we moved in a bed and a dresser. It has a good view of the garden." The room was perfect, larger than her space at the boarding house and filled with afternoon sunlight. A quilt in shades of blue and green covered the bed, and lace curtains framed the windows. On a small table by the window sat a basket containing thread, needles, and fabric scraps. "Your grandmother was a seamstress?" "Among other things. She said keeping her hands busy helped her think." Jack set down the bag and moved toward the door. "I'll let you get settled. The kitchen is downstairs, and you should find everything you need to prepare meals. I usually eat simple food, but I won't complain if you want to cook something fancier." "Mr. Morrison?" He turned back, eyebrows raised. "Thank you for giving me this opportunity." Something shifted in his expression, becoming warmer. "It's Jack, and I think we'll both benefit from the arrangement." After he left, Maria Elena unpacked her few belongings and explored the house. The kitchen was well equipped with a modern stove, plenty of pots and pans, and a pantry stocked with basic supplies. She found flour, dried beans, salt pork, and various herbs hanging in bundles from the rafters. Through the kitchen window, she could see Jack working with one of the horses in the corral. He moved with the same quiet confidence she had observed in town, never hurrying but always purposeful. The horse, a young bay, seemed skittish, but Jack's patience was evident as he worked with the animal, never forcing or rushing. Maria Elena began preparations for the evening meal, planning something more substantial than the simple fare Jack probably prepared for himself. She found onions and potatoes in the root cellar, along with carrots and turnips from the garden. A ham hung in the smokehouse, and she cut off enough for a proper dinner. As she worked, she thought about the strange turn her life had taken. 3 weeks ago, she had been preparing for a wedding, believing her future was settled. Now she was cooking in the kitchen of a stranger miles from anywhere, with only her own skills and determination to depend on. Yet for the first time in weeks, she felt something approaching peace. The kitchen felt welcoming, the house solid and safe, and Jack Morrison, whatever else he might be, seemed like a decent man who judged people fairly. The sun was setting when Jack came in from the corral, followed by an older man with graying hair and weathered features, who must be Pete Kowalski. Both men removed their hats when they saw Maria Elena, and Pete's eyes lit up with curiosity. "So, you're the lady who's going to civilize this bear," Pete said with a grin. "I'm Pete Kowalski, and I'm pleased to make your acquaintance. Maria Elena Vasquez. I hope I can make myself useful here. If that smell coming from the kitchen is any indication, you already have," Jack said. "What are we having?" "Ham with vegetables and biscuits. It should be ready soon." Pete slapped Jack on the shoulder. "Boy, you might have actually done something smart for once." The meal was a success. Both men complimented the food generously, and conversation flowed easily. Pete told stories about the early days of the ranch, when Jack's grandfather was still alive, and Jack shared updates about the cattle and plans for the coming winter. "We'll need to move the herd to the lower pastures soon," Jack said. "Weather's been mild, but it won't last much longer." "That young bay you were working with today," Maria Elena said. "He seemed nervous." Jack looked surprised that she had noticed. "He's green, just brought in from the range last month. Smart animal, but he's never been handled much. Takes time to build trust." "Your grandmother had a way with horses, too," Pete added. "Seemed like they understood each other. She taught me that horses and people aren't so different. They respond to kindness better than force, but they need to know you're strong enough to protect them." Maria Elena thought about those words as she cleaned up after dinner. There had been no force in the way Jack had offered her employment, no sense that he was taking advantage of her desperation. Yet she sensed a strength in him that went beyond his obvious physical power. The next few days fell into a comfortable routine. Maria Elena rose early to prepare breakfast, then spent her mornings cleaning and organizing the house. The afternoons were devoted to cooking and mending, and she found time to work in the garden, harvesting the last of the vegetables and preparing the beds for winter. Jack was a considerate employer, never demanding and always polite. He worked hard from dawn to dusk, often coming in dusty and tired. But he never failed to thank her for meals or ask about her day. Gradually, their conversations grew longer and more personal. "You said your mother was Apache," Jack said one evening as they sat on the front porch watching the stars emerge. "Do you know which band?" "Chiricahua. My grandmother's people lived in the mountains of southeastern Arizona before they were forced onto the reservation." Maria Elena was surprised by how easily she shared information she usually kept private. "My mother met my father when he came through their territory as a young merchant. She left her people to marry him. That must have been difficult for her." "I think it was. She never spoke much about her childhood, but sometimes I caught her looking toward the mountains with such longing." Maria Elena touched her turquoise pendant. "This was my grandmother's. My mother gave it to me before she died, said it would help me remember who I was." "And who are you?" The question was gentle, curious, rather than challenging. Maria Elena considered the question seriously. "I'm not sure anymore. I used to think I knew, but recent events have made me question everything." "Maybe that's not a bad thing. Sometimes we have to lose who we thought we were to discover who we really are." She looked at him curiously. "You sound like you speak from experience." Jack was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkness beyond the porch. "When my parents died, I was angry for a long time. Angry at them for leaving, at God for taking them, at my grandfather for trying to fill their place. I thought I knew exactly what kind of man I wanted to be, and it wasn't the kind who ended up alone on a ranch in Colorado." "What changed?" "My grandmother mostly. She helped me understand that fighting what is doesn't change what is. But accepting what is doesn't mean you stop trying to make things better." He turned to look at her. "She would have said your former fiancé's family did you a favor. Better to learn their true nature before the wedding than after." "I suppose that's true, but it doesn't make the rejection hurt less." "No, it doesn't. but maybe their loss is someone else's gain. There was something in his voice, something warm and meaningful, that made Maria Elena's heart skip. Before she could respond, he stood and excused himself for the night, leaving her alone on the porch with racing thoughts. The routine continued for another week, marked by small moments of connection. Jack praised her biscuits and asked for the recipe. She mended a tear in his favorite shirt and found it hanging clean on his door the next morning with a note of thanks. They shared stories over evening meals and comfortable silences during the day. Then Pete arrived one morning with news that changed everything. "Trouble in town," he announced without preamble. "That banker from Santa Fe, Patterson, he's been asking questions about Maria Elena." Maria Elena's blood turned cold. "William, what kind of questions?" "Wanting to know where she went, who's seen her, whether she's working anywhere. Offered money for information." Pete looked grim. "Word is he's coming to Cedar Ridge himself, claims she stole something from his family." "That's not true." Maria Elena stood so quickly she knocked over her coffee cup. "I never took anything that wasn't mine." Jack was already reaching for his hat. "What else did you hear, Pete?" "Henderson seemed nervous about it. Some of the other townspeople, too. They don't like the idea of trouble coming to Cedar Ridge, especially not over someone they see as an outsider." Maria Elena felt the familiar weight of rejection settling over her. "I should leave. I won't bring trouble to your ranch." "You're not going anywhere." Jack's voice was firm, final. "This is your home now." "But if William is claiming I'm a thief?" "Then he's lying, and we'll prove it." Jack stood and looked directly at her, his storm-colored eyes steady and determined. "You're under my protection now, Maria Elena. No one will harm you or force you to leave." "You don't understand. William's family has money and influence. They could make life very difficult for you." "Let them try." The simple confidence in his voice was both reassuring and frightening. Maria Elena had spent her life learning to bend before stronger forces, to disappear when conflict arose. But Jack Morrison stood like a mountain, immovable and sure. "I need to know what we're really dealing with," Jack continued. "Tell me exactly what happened in Santa Fe." Maria Elena sank back into her chair, her hands shaking slightly. "William proposed 6 months ago. His family seemed to accept me at first, or at least they tolerated me. But as the wedding approached, his mother became more and more critical. She said I wasn't suitable for their social position, that my heritage would be an embarrassment. And the day before the ceremony, she offered me money to leave town quietly. When I refused, she became angry. Said if I went through with the wedding, she would make sure everyone knew exactly what kind of woman I was." Maria Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. "She threatened to spread rumors about my character, to claim I had been with other men." Jack's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "What did William do?" "He stood there and said nothing. When I looked at him for support, he couldn't even meet my eyes. So I left." Maria Elena lifted her chin. "I returned the ring and took only what belonged to me." "Then you have nothing to worry about. Truth has a way of coming out." "Does it?" "In my experience, people believe what they want to believe, especially when the alternative requires them to think badly of those with money and position." Pete cleared his throat. "There's something else. Word is Patterson's hired some men to travel with him. Claim they're for protection, but they look more like the kind who cause trouble than prevent it." The implications hung heavy in the air. Maria Elena felt trapped between fear and fury. She had done nothing wrong, but somehow she was still being punished, and now her problems threatened to engulf Jack Morrison, who had shown her nothing but kindness. "I won't let you suffer for my troubles," she said quietly. "Whatever you think of me, I won't repay your kindness by bringing danger to your door." Jack moved to stand beside her chair, his presence solid and reassuring. "Maria Elena, look at me." She raised her eyes to meet his, and what she saw there took her breath away. There was strength, yes, but also something deeper, something that looked almost like, "You belong here," he said simply. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." The words sent warmth flooding through her chest, but also terror. She had learned not to trust such declarations, not to believe in promises of protection and belonging. But looking into Jack Morrison's steady gaze, she found herself wanting to believe, despite everything. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you risk trouble for someone you barely know?" Jack was quiet for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but certain. "Because from the moment I saw you sitting on that boarding house porch, looking so brave and so alone, I knew you were meant to be here. I don't pretend to understand it, but I know it as surely as I know the sun will rise tomorrow." Before Maria Elena could respond to this extraordinary statement, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Jack moved to the window and peered out, his expression hardening. "Riders coming. 5 men, well-dressed. One of them riding a fancy bay horse that's never seen real work." Maria Elena's heart sank. "William, he's found me." Jack turned from the window and his face was transformed. Gone was the gentle, patient man she had come to know. In his place stood someone who looked capable of handling any threat. "Pete, take Maria Elena upstairs. Stay with her until I call for you." "Jack, no. I should face him myself." "You shouldn't have to face anything alone ever again." Jack's voice was gentle but implacable. "Trust me, Maria Elena. Can you do that?" Looking into his eyes, Maria Elena found that she could. Despite everything that had taught her not to depend on others, she trusted Jack Morrison completely. "Yes," she whispered. As Pete guided her toward the stairs, she heard the riders approaching the house. Through the upstairs window, she could see William Patterson dismounting from his bay horse, his face set in familiar lines of arrogant determination. The 4 men with him looked exactly as Pete had described, more like hired muscle than respectable protection. Below, she heard Jack's voice, calm and polite, greeting the visitors. William's response was sharp with authority and displeasure. The conversation was too quiet for her to make out words, but the tone was unmistakably hostile. Maria Elena gripped the windowsill, torn between fear for Jack and fury at William for pursuing her across 2 territories. Everything she had tried to build here was threatened by a man who had already made it clear she wasn't good enough for him. But as she watched Jack Morrison face down 5 men without flinching, she began to understand what he had meant about belonging. For the first time in her life, someone was willing to stand between her and the world's cruelty. Someone saw her as worth protecting. The question now was whether that protection would be enough to overcome money, influence, and the willingness of desperate men to use whatever means necessary to get what they wanted. The voices from the front porch grew louder, and Maria Elena strained to hear what was being said. Pete positioned himself by the window, his weathered face grim as he watched the scene below. "Your man's got spine." "I'll give him that," Pete murmured. "Ain't backing down an inch." Through the glass, Maria Elena could see Jack standing on the porch steps, his massive frame relaxed but ready. The 5 men from Santa Fe remained mounted. A deliberate choice meant to give them a height advantage and the ability to leave quickly if needed. William Patterson sat his bay horse with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. "I'll ask you again," William's voice carried clearly in the afternoon air. "I'm looking for a woman named Maria Elena Rodriguez. Dark hair, about medium height, Mexican features. She's wanted for theft in Santa Fe." "And I'll tell you again," Jack replied evenly. "I don't know anyone by that name." Maria Elena winced. Jack was technically telling the truth since she had been using her mother's surname, Vasquez, but the deception still stung. She hated that her presence had put him in the position of having to lie, even by omission. "Come now, Morrison." William's tone turned condescending. "A woman matching that description was seen in Cedar Ridge last week. Multiple witnesses place her in conversation with you. Surely you remember such an encounter." "I remember talking to a lady who was looking for honest work. Miss Vasquez has been in my employ for over a week now." "Vasquez, Rodriguez, it's the same woman. These people change names like they change clothes." The contempt in William's voice made Maria Elena's hands clench into fists. "I'm here to take her back to Santa Fe to face charges." "What charges would those be?" William gestured to one of his companions, a thin man with pale eyes and a carefully trimmed beard. "Mr. Garrett here is a deputy sheriff from Santa Fe. He has a warrant for her arrest." Garrett reached into his coat and produced a folded paper. "Theft of family heirlooms, valued at over $200. The warrant is properly signed and witnessed." Jack didn't move to take the paper. "What heirlooms?" "Jewelry belonging to the Patterson family," William replied smoothly. "Items that went missing after the woman broke off our engagement and fled town." "That's a lie!" The words burst from Maria Elena before she could stop herself. She was at the window now, leaning out so she could be heard. "I never took anything that didn't belong to me." The men below looked up, and William's face split into a triumphant smile. "There she is. Maria Elena Rodriguez, also known as Vasquez, you're under arrest for theft." Jack moved slightly, positioning himself more clearly between the mounted men and the house. "Miss Vasquez, please go back inside." "No, Jack. I won't hide while they spread lies about me." Maria Elena's voice rang with fury and determination. "William, you know perfectly well I never took anything from your family. The only jewelry I ever received from you was the engagement ring, and I returned that before I left Santa Fe." "Perhaps you've forgotten the turquoise necklace," William said with false reasonableness. "A family heirloom passed down from my great-grandmother. My mother noticed it was missing from her jewelry box the day after you left." Maria Elena's hand flew instinctively to her throat, where her grandmother's pendant lay beneath her dress. Understanding flooded through her, cold and bitter. "You mean this?" She pulled the pendant out, letting it catch the afternoon sunlight. "This belonged to my Apache grandmother. I've worn it since I was a child." "That's the piece," Garrett said, leaning forward in his saddle. "Matches the description exactly. Turquoise stone set in silver with traditional Indian markings. Because it is a traditional Apache piece, made by my grandmother's people." William's smile grew wider. "Who's to say where it really came from? An Apache woman, a thief's daughter? These people all look alike anyway. The jewelry was in my mother's possession, now it's in yours. The law is quite clear about such matters." The casual racism in his words hit Maria Elena like a physical blow. She had known William was weak and prejudiced, but she hadn't understood the depth of his cruelty until this moment. He was willing to destroy her life over a broken engagement, to brand her a thief simply because she had dared to reject his family's bigotry. "You bastard." Jack's voice was deadly quiet, but it carried clearly to every man present. "You'd frame an innocent woman because your pride was hurt?" "Watch your tongue, Morrison," Garrett warned. "You're interfering with legal business." "Legal business?" Jack descended the porch steps slowly, and somehow his measured approach was more menacing than if he had charged. "What's legal about a lying warrant based on trumped-up charges?" "The warrant is valid," William insisted, but Maria Elena could hear uncertainty creeping into his voice. Up close, Jack Morrison was even more imposing than he had appeared from horseback. "Is it? Let me see it." Garrett hesitated, then handed down the folded paper. Jack read it carefully. taking his time while the 5 men grew increasingly restless. "Interesting," Jack said finally. "This warrant was signed yesterday but dated 2 weeks ago. That's peculiar timing, don't you think?" "Paperwork takes time," Garrett said quickly. "I'm sure it does. It also says here that the theft occurred on September 10th. But Miss Vasquez didn't leave Santa Fe until September 12th. Are you claiming she stole something 2 days after she left town?" William's face flushed red. "The dates might be approximate." "Might be? The law requires precise documentation, doesn't it, Deputy Garrett? Especially for felony warrants." Garrett was looking less confident by the moment. "The warrant is valid. I have my orders." "From whom? The Santa Fe Sheriff's Office, or the Patterson Bank?" The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Maria Elena saw 2 of William's hired men exchange glances, and she suddenly understood that they weren't all as committed to this charade as their employer. "You're out of line, Morrison," William snapped. "This woman is a thief and a liar. She seduced my son with promises and lies, then robbed my family when her deception was discovered." "Actually," Jack said conversationally, "I think you're the liar here, Patterson, and I think your deputy friend knows it." He turned to address Garrett directly. "How much is he paying you for this little performance? Whatever it is, it's not worth the federal charges you'll face for conspiracy and false arrest." "Federal charges?" Garrett's Adam's apple bobbed nervously. "Miss Vasquez is under my protection on my land. Any attempt to remove her without proper legal justification constitutes kidnapping across territorial lines. The federal marshals take a dim view of such activities." Maria Elena felt a surge of hope mixed with terror. Jack was fighting for her, but at what cost? If he was wrong about the legal implications, he could end up in jail himself. William seemed to sense his advantage slipping away. "Garrett, arrest them both. Morrison is clearly an accomplice after the fact." But Garrett was shaking his head. "I didn't sign up for a range war, Patterson. If this warrant is questionable—" "The warrant is perfectly legal." "Then you won't mind if we ride back to Cedar Ridge and ask Sheriff Coleman to verify it," Jack suggested. "I'm sure he'd be happy to examine the documentation and contact the appropriate authorities in Santa Fe." The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Maria Elena could see the calculation in William's eyes, the realization that his plan was unraveling. Sheriff Coleman would likely examine the warrant more carefully than William had expected. And if the dates were truly wrong, or if Garrett had been bribed— "There's no need to involve the local law," William said finally. "This is a Santa Fe matter." "I disagree. Any arrest on Colorado soil is very much a local matter." One of the hired men, a bearded fellow who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. "Patterson, you said this would be simple. Didn't mention anything about federal marshals or range wars." "Shut up, Davies." "No, I don't think I will." Davies looked directly at Jack. "Mister, we was told this woman was a common thief who ran off with jewelry. Patterson paid us to come along as witnesses, nothing more. If there's federal law involved, I'm out. You're under contract to witness an arrest, not to start a war." Davies gathered his reins. "Boys, I think we should head back to town." "I agree," said another of the men. "This smells like trouble." William's face was purple with rage. "Garrett, arrest Morrison for obstruction of justice." But Garrett was already folding up the warrant. "I need to verify some information before making any arrests. We'll be in touch, Morrison." "Anytime," Jack replied calmly. As the 4 men wheeled their horses and rode away, William remained behind, his face twisted with fury and humiliation. For a moment, Maria Elena thought he might try something desperate. Then his gaze shifted from Jack to her, and she saw something cold and calculating in his eyes. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "You think you can hide behind this giant forever? I have friends in Denver, in the territorial government. I can make life very difficult for anyone who harbors a known thief." "And I have friends too," Jack replied. Friends who don't take kindly to men who threaten women or spread lies to cover their own shame. Shame? What shame could I possibly feel over a half-breed whore? The words were barely out of William's mouth when Jack moved. For such a large man, he was surprisingly fast. Before Maria Elena could blink, he had crossed the distance between himself and William's horse, reached up, and dragged the smaller man from the saddle. William hit the ground hard, the breath driven from his lungs. Jack hauled him upright and held him at arm's length, his massive hands gripping William's coat. "Apologize," Jack said quietly. "Go to hell," William gasped. Jack's grip tightened. "You just called the woman I love a whore. On my land, to my face. Now you're going to apologize, or I'm going to show you what happens to men who insult ladies in my presence." The woman I love. The words rang in Maria Elena's ears like church bells. Jack Morrison, this gentle giant who had given her shelter and protection, had just declared his love in front of her former fiancé and half of Colorado territory. "I won't apologize to that woman," William snarled. "Then you'll apologize to me for bringing lies and corruption to my ranch." Jack lifted William slightly, so the smaller man's feet barely touched the ground. William's face went pale as he realized exactly how precarious his position was. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I can't hear you." "I'm sorry," William's voice cracked with fear and rage. "I'm sorry for coming to your ranch." Jack released him so suddenly that William stumbled backward, nearly falling again. "Good. Now get on your horse and ride away. If I see you on my land again, I'll shoot you for trespassing." William scrambled onto his horse, his dignity in tatters. "This isn't finished, Morrison. I'll find a way to make you both pay." "Try it," Jack said simply. "But remember what happened to the last man who threatened someone under my protection." The quiet confidence in his voice was more intimidating than any shouted threat could have been. William jerked his horse's head around and spurred the animal into a gallop, disappearing toward the road in a cloud of dust. Jack stood watching until the rider was out of sight, then turned and looked up at Maria Elena in the window. The fury was gone from his face, replaced by concern and something deeper. "It's safe now," he called. "You can come down." Maria Elena's legs felt unsteady as she made her way downstairs. Pete was grinning broadly, slapping Jack on the shoulder as she emerged onto the porch. "Boy, you handled that better than a Sunday sermon," Pete chuckled. "Though I thought you might actually throw that fancy man clear into next week." "I considered it," Jack admitted. "But Maria Elena wouldn't have approved of violence." Maria Elena found her voice at last. "Jack, what you said about me being the woman you love." Jack's cheeks reddened slightly. "I meant every word, though I probably should have found a better time and place to tell you." "No," Maria Elena said softly. "The timing was perfect." She moved closer to him, close enough to see the uncertainty in his storm-colored eyes. This man had just faced down 5 armed men to protect her. He had called her the woman he loved in front of witnesses. And now he looked nervous, as if she might reject him. "Jack Morrison," she said, reaching up to touch his cheek. "You are the most extraordinary man I've ever known." "Does that mean—" He swallowed hard. "Does that mean you might consider staying? Not just as my housekeeper, but as— As what?" "As my wife. If you'll have me." The proposal was simple, direct, completely without artifice. So different from William's elaborate production with the expensive ring and formal speeches. Jack was offering himself as he was, asking nothing more than she be herself in return. "Yes," she said, and watched his face transform with joy. "Yes, I'll marry you." Jack's kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if he couldn't quite believe she had accepted him. Then Maria Elena's arms went around his neck, and the kiss deepened into something that promised passion and partnership, and forever. When they finally broke apart, Pete was wiping his eyes with his bandana. "About time," he said gruffly. "Your grandmother would be pleased, Jack. She always said you'd know the right woman when you met her." "How did she know?" Maria Elena asked. "When you said she would have liked me?" Jack smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. "Because she married a man whose grandmother was Cheyenne. She knew what it was like to be caught between two worlds, to be judged for blood that runs in your veins. She would have seen herself in you." "And she would have seen that you belong here," Pete added. "This land needs someone who understands both its wildness and its gentleness. Someone who can tend the gardens and ride the range, speak to the horses in their own language, and heal what's been broken." Maria Elena thought about all the places she had tried to fit, all the people who had made her feel like she was too much of one thing and not enough of another. Here, on this ranch with this remarkable man, she finally understood what belonging felt like. "William will try to make trouble," she said. "He meant what he said about having friends in Denver. Let him try." "I meant what I said about having friends, too. Sheriff Coleman's been wanting to clean up some of the corruption that's been seeping in from the bigger cities. A fake warrant and a fraudulent arrest might be just the ammunition he needs." "Besides," Pete grinned, "wait until the territorial governor hears that someone's been harassing Jack Morrison's wife. Your husband's got more friends than he likes to admit." "The territorial governor?" Jack looked embarrassed. "We served together during the Indian troubles 5 years ago. He owes me a favor or two." Maria Elena stared at him. "You never mentioned that you had served in the army." "It wasn't something that seemed important. The past is past. What matters is the future." "The future." Maria Elena looked out across the grassland, golden in the afternoon sun, and felt something settle into place in her heart. She had spent so much of her life looking backward, trying to understand where she came from and why she didn't fit. Now, with Jack's strong arm around her waist and the promise of tomorrow spreading out before them like the endless sky, she finally understood. She wasn't meant to fit into the boxes other people built. She was meant to create her own place in the world, with someone who saw her mixed heritage not as a burden to overcome, but as a gift to be treasured. "When shall we be married?" she asked. "Tomorrow, if you want. Sheriff Coleman can perform the ceremony, and Pete here can stand as witness." "What about a dress? A proper wedding?" Jack's eyes grew soft. "Maria Elena, you could wear a feed sack, and you'd still be the most beautiful bride in Colorado territory. But if you want a fancy dress and a big celebration, we'll wait until you have everything you need." Maria Elena thought about the wedding dress still folded in her carpetbag upstairs, the elaborate gown chosen for a ceremony that would have joined her to a man who was ashamed of her. Then she looked at Jack Morrison, who saw her as worthy of love and protection and partnership, and made her choice. "I have everything I need right here," she said, "but maybe we should wait a week or two. Give people time to hear the real story before William's lies take root." "Good thinking," Pete agreed. "Let me spread the word about what really happened here today. By the time Patterson's version reaches town, folks will already know the truth." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Maria Elena stood on the porch of her new home with her future husband's arms around her. For the first time in her life, she wasn't running from something or trying to become someone else. She was exactly where she belonged, with exactly the right person, ready to build a life that honored both her Apache grandmother's strength and her Mexican father's dreams. The woman who had been rejected for her origins had found a man who saw those same origins as the foundation of her character, and in the morning she would wake up in the house that was now her home, cook breakfast for the man who loved her, and begin the life she was always meant to live. The life of Maria Elena Morrison, rancher's wife, keeper of gardens, and the woman who proved that sometimes the most beautiful futures grow from the most painful rejections. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and the promise of rain, and Maria Elena smiled. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, But tonight, she was home.